We're joined on Emmo Forum by Dr. Sue Packer, who is a community paediatrician, has been working in the area of child abuse and neglect for more than 20 years. Sue has been and is about to end her term as the ACT Citizen of the Year, in the Centenary Citizen of the Year, no less. And Sue is on the board of NAPCAN, which is the National Association for the Prevention of Child Abuse and Neglect. The purpose of Emmo Forum today, as usually, is to identify those issues that really should take our attention and define policy making in the early period of the 21st century. And I, for one, believe that this issue of child abuse and neglect should be in that top priority list of areas of public policy concern and attention. So, Sue, thank you very much for joining us on Emmo Forum. Yeah. I wonder if you could just start by sharing briefly your experiences over this 20 to 25 years as a community paediatrician. How prevalent is child abuse, and how have our attitudes towards child abuse changed, if at all?
Yeah. I guess like most people, when I started paediatrics, I knew virtually nothing about child abuse. It was not part of our curriculum. And at those days, which is a long, long time ago, there was very little process for dealing with it. In fact, the first children I recall seeing who were abused, it was almost treated casually. There was no real response. And I remember that startled me somewhat. At that stage, I thought I'd be a paediatric gastroenterologist.
Right.
And it really began to dawn on me that most situations for children, even if there is a health problem, how this is dealt with, how the child manages, depends on the family support. And in the worst of cases, their health problem is caused by the family actions and lack of support. And this increasingly bothered me, so that together with a lot of other experiences, particularly working in Darwin for some time and then working in Nottingham with a very enlightened professor of paediatrics, made me realise that if anything's going to be made better for children, it's not really at the end of treating serious established disease, even though this is obviously important and must continue. But we really have to look at how we as a community see and value children, what we provide to support them and their families, and where they can go to help, really before they get problems.
Yeah. So you're describing physical disease here. It seems to be that you're saying that a lot of physical health problems can be traced back to the family environment.
I think most things, like with physical health, things aren't pure. At the bad end of the spectrum, you have children who actually have illnesses induced by disturbed parents.
Yeah.
Through to parents where there is a physical illness, their interpretation is determined by their own experiences, both in the past and their experiences of the health profession. Right through to children with increasingly behavioural disturbances, with increasingly medical diagnoses, where the whole parenting response, parenting understanding is a massive factor in this. One particular concern of mine there is that when we rightly have a big concern about diseases or problems in the autistic spectrum disorder and children with attention deficit problems, well, from my work, certainly not all, but a significant number of children with these problems, trauma is a massive problem in their lives.
I didn't know that.
Most doctors don't even ask about trauma. A sort of example I'll give is a little boy sent along to a paediatrician for diagnosis of attention deficit disorder. The specialist read the referring doctor's letter, and the mother said, "Is that all the letter says? Does it mention that my little boy from an overseas country actually saw his father shot and killed in front of him?" Now, why do you have attention problems and behaviour problems when you're dealing with something like that? And
that's right.
We still, even in the 21st century, with a much better knowledge of abuse, we still tend to not think of the impact of incidents on a child's life. And obviously this is infinitely worse if it's a chronic attitude to a child.
And so in those cases, I mean, I hope that the standard response is not just medication.
Well, the worrying thing is, I think, for some of those children it is. You'll appreciate, everybody appreciates that some people take to parenting better than others and manage it better, and some people are dealing with really overwhelming circumstances as well as being a parent, and all of these things contribute.
So the parents struggling
The parents can be struggling with themselves, let alone with the child. But unfortunately, I think many people within the health system tend to look to the child's behaviour as the instigator and the thing that needs addressing, rather than saying we have a child in an environment, what things in this environment are contributing and what can we do about the environment.
And what have you learned, Sue, over that 25-year period? How have things changed in the area of diagnosing or assisting, supporting kids who have been abused? Has the incidence of child abuse increased or decreased? Do we really know?
Obviously things have changed. Obviously there's a much greater awareness of abuse and neglect. I think the figures are really tricky because we don't have good figures, and even within different states and territories there's the different criteria for determining something as abuse and neglect or not determining it. So I think the incidence of abuse and neglect, other than I said we have over, I don't know how long, way back when I started doing paediatrics in the early 70s, it's still not part of the general curriculum for doctors. It's just beginning to come in. Yet it has so much a factor in children's lives. We still don't like to think about it. We think of abusive families being bad families. We don't think of abusive families being trying their hardest, inept, incompetent, bewildered, disturbed families.
Can I give you an example of that? I was at a school in my local electorate, and the teachers were saying that most of the kids in this school, and I'm not going to even stigmatise the area, had been abused, and the audience was full of adults, and they were getting their Year 7 awards, and I said, well, where are their parents? And they said, there. So they'd come along proudly to see their children get their Year 7 graduation certificates. In a sense, you know, I couldn't help but feel they're not bad people. They're probably struggling people. But the principal's saying most of these kids have been abused.
And a lot of it is also attitudes. I mean, I grew up at a time when if you didn't spank your child, you were not a very caring parent. I was spanked. I don't think it did me any major trauma, but I think I was probably fortunate I had a mother that, my father was often not there, and my mother was not given to spanking, and the list of spankable offences was fairly definite. And I remember as a small child probably being fairly confident and loved that I'd work out that the joy of doing this forbidden thing was far better than the likely punishment, so I'd go ahead and do what I intended to do. So it wasn't a great deterrent. And I went on from this, when my children were small, to spank them. And then I can still remember very clearly with my eldest son, when he was 5, and I went to hit him and saw him preparing himself to be hit, and thought, I never, ever wanted my child to look at me in this way. And how have we got to this point? And it is not necessary. And it was a sort of real road to Damascus moment. And the family didn't fall apart when I decided not to spank, and I still was a pretty terrible parent at times. But it's interesting talking to the kids now as young adults, and they can't even remember it. So we say perhaps it's not traumatic, but perhaps it is. But
well, certainly a belting is, you know, and that's different too.
A furious belting is, but even with what was called routine spanking, mostly, if you're honest with yourself, it's when the parent
is stressed,
frustrated, stressed,
tired,
angry, very much like a 2-year-old themselves, and really needing a big, strong grown-up to come and say, okay, off to bed for you, have a little quiet time and settle down and behave yourself again.
At the risk of sounding nannies, from the nanny state. My experience was quite similar with our children.
Yeah.
I used to spank them,
Yeah.
and they kind of understood that and transgressed and thought. And then one day I thought, this is actually not working.
Yeah.
And I noticed that if I was under a bit of pressure at work or whatever, I was more likely to do it. And I thought, hold on, this is a terrible indulgence. Those children don't know when I'm more or less stressed. So to them it would be kind of weird as to why Dad did it in particular. So I stopped.
Yes.
And
the life doesn't fall apart.
We sent them to time out in their rooms. They'd be pretty upset about that, but you go in after 10 minutes and they're reading a book.
Yep.
And they've settled down, everyone's settled down, the other kids have settled down.
Yeah.
And no need for any of that spanking.
And I guess that brings me on to another concern with the whole issue of being a parent, getting help. A lot more help is available now, but we are so anxious about duplication of services and all the rest of the stuff that it can be hard to access these services, and you have to have a defined problem. You can't go, there's nothing there, or very little, not nowhere near enough, to celebrate being a parent.
Yeah.
Wow, you've had a new baby. Isn't this exciting? Did you know there's a child and family centre down the corner? Let's pop in there, have a cup of coffee, case it out, see what it's like. Finding places, I mean, we know it's all a village to raise a child stuff, but the modern village is not a defined village.
Yeah, yeah.
And trying to map your way through that village to find things that help you is difficult. And while most of our services delivered are focused on having a problem, the people who most need help miss out or don't get help till the problem is really, really entrenched and very, very much harder to deal with.
And obvious so that it's come to the attention of someone.
And a lot more, I guess, my message in all of it is celebrating children, not as little wonderful angels, but as human beings who are very much developed in relation to their experiences.
And perhaps not as possessions of parents, like the pets and the
people.
Backyard and the, and the holiday hut. I've got 3 kids. Well, yes, you do, but you don't kind of own them.
No.
They are human beings in their own right. We are starting to sound very kind of left-wing sort of thing, but I think there are some attitudinal changes.
But I think you'll find it across parents, right across. It's not letting kids get away with murder. No. Kids love and need limits.
That's right.
And they like to know the limits are still there.
Sometimes.
But the sort of experiment you can do, if you're walking down the street and you see a family walking by and you sort of say things like, gee, I love your lovely knight in shiny new sandals to the little girl or something like that. Children are so unused to being singled out and spoken to. And I'm not saying doing it in an unsafe way. We've got such a paranoia about pedophiles, and pedophiles are probably one of the smaller problems in terms of child abuse. It's a very much smaller problem than families. But if you just start saying, and things like, oh, what a fantastic looking family, you must be proud. We don't reinforce that. We'll certainly say, excuse me, your child's destroying that display, will you stop them? And I go, we've got a child in the restaurant, what are we going to do about it? But there's very little positive reinforcement. And very little acknowledging that being a parent is tricky. It's even hard if you see a mum with a tantruming child and you say, gee, some days are horrible, aren't they? It just helps.
But going back to your point about the children themselves looking for some guidance, and I think we're agreeing it doesn't have to be physical guidance, but kids get very tired towards the end of the day and when they haven't had something to eat and it's just up to dinner time. And sometimes you can say to the kids, go and read a book or go and do this or that. And they almost thank you for saying, yeah, I was losing it there. Dad, I was losing it. And they go, oh, yeah, okay, I've got some structure back in my day. So I don't think there's any harm in that. They actually look for that sort of guidance.
There's none at all. And I mean, it's more acknowledging that the child is also dealing with their own feelings and emotions and tiredness. And you as a grown-up have, over the years, learnt more skills, we hope. Not all of them have. And certain things you learn that you can guarantee with kids playing with water and things like this can be enormous. So if you can cope with the water on the floor, you say, can you wash up those few things over there? And the kid is doing something useful, contributing, you say, gee, it's great to have your help.
Yeah.
And a lot of it is this distraction, and it's not condoning bad behaviour, but it's being tuned in and communicating. And I think a lot of the learning about tuning in and communication, without a doubt, child abuse is a disastrous failure of communication.
Yeah.
A lot of it, there's no doubt that step parents are overrepresented. And I think there are a lot of different expectations placed on step parents.
Yeah.
There are more no-go areas. There's more trying to show your partner that you're involved and interested in these children. But these children can have quite a confusing time. And certainly this group of children is overrepresented in a child abuse assessment service.
Right, I understand.
And that's, again, I think a lot of it's needing help. A lot of it comes out of ignorance, extraordinary ignorance. I mean, we've had babies hit for poking their tongue out. We must teach them not to be rude. Whereas if you know that little babies explore the world with their tongue. But it's partly also showing the parent that, see, I'm a fantastic support for you in getting these kids to behave and be good.
The kids,
and there's a lot of ignorance about this. And
what's
very
your
little help.
sense as a member of NAPCAN and a board member of the change in the incidence of child abuse, prevalence of child abuse, vis-a-vis the alternative explanation is that we now know more about it. There's more reporting, there's more information, so there's no reduction in prevalence. It's just that we have more statistics on it.
Well, we certainly have more statistics. I think mandatory reporting is a two-edged sword. It means, particularly for people like doctors, you are forced to confront something left to yourself you'd probably never think about it. And with a legal imperative, you have to do something about it.
Right.
But there's also this shoveling of the problem into somebody else's backyard. I've reported, they deal with it.
Yeah.
There's not the feeling that this child is having a horrible time, this family is having a horrible time. I think you can work quite well by saying, look, with what's happened, I have no alternative, I have to report. But what can I do to help? And we don't add the, can I help in any way?
And GPs probably feel they're overwhelmed anyway.
And they do.
They'd be
and
giving flu shots and things like that.
And they're possibly not the person to know, but they need to know networks. So I think all you can say is child abuse is a very significant problem. I think we've got more bewildered parents because being a parent in the 21st century, the way of living, our priorities are changing so much that fitting children into these priorities is a different thing from our parents and our grandparents.
Time poor, you know, people
extremely time poor. Well, the sort of thing I found when my children were very little, I did some work. Even if my baby was being looked after by loving grandparents and dad, you come back and you're not really in tune with the baby. It takes time to re-establish the connection. I don't think we give enough thought and consideration and support to this sort of thing happening. And then leaving your baby in the care of somebody who might be very caring and loving, but they're not you. And they respond differently. So this is also, some babies are more sensitive than others to this. And so I guess my hands are doing it. All of this is a two-way communication, and we often leave the child out of the communication.
So what's your sense, Sue, is there more child abuse or more reporting of child abuse?
Definitely more reporting, definitely more awareness, but I don't think there's as much ownership as it being our collective community responsibility rather than why isn't child protection doing something. I've got a very grim New Zealand cartoon from a newspaper saying, it starts off with a little drawing of a coffin. This is the child who was abused. Next drawing is, these are the parents of the child that was abused. These are the family and the friends of the child. These are the neighbours of the people who are child abused. And then it's got a doctor, a policeman, and a social worker. These are the people who are blamed for the abuse. And you really have to look at the world of the child and so this is really at every level looking at supports for families as individuals and things that help these people grow up.
But who can support them if not?
And then who is around. And most of our support comes from informal community networks.
Yeah.
And if you don't have those informal community networks,
you're very vulnerable.
You're in a very, very vulnerable position, because at times you're totally overwhelmed.
Well, single mothers trying to cope, you know, a couple of kids by the time you're 19, and you know, a bloke comes along, sweeps you off your feet. You think, God, he could be helpful.
And he's the one that then lines the child up against the wall and says, "Stand there for half an hour."
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, you're grounded.
And then the mum doesn't want to lose her partner, and so she ends up tolerating more than she probably would want to tolerate. Yeah.
And there's no doubt the other big group, of course, that come up in every discussion, alcohol and drug abuse, and mental health problems, and the two so often go together.
Yeah.
And these parents are really bewildered and struggling, and often totally disconnected from the child, and that's why those children are in a very, very dangerous position.
Poor state.
And that's where a lot of hard decisions have to be made, but we can't put them off because they're hard. I mean, the thing I've learnt more than anything else is the children's experience from before they're born really does shape their life trajectory, their life course.
Oh, sure.
The actual communications with the baby in the first days and weeks of life are critical.
Yeah.
That's when they learn that there's somebody there.
Yes.
And one of the sadnesses is learning from some of these babies in drug-using families that they don't necessarily expect this. And this baby who's absolutely incapable of surviving on their own is learning different survival techniques to try and cope.
You might be interested, of a program, again in an area I represented, of home nursing. And the way it happened is so mum goes to hospital to have the baby, and just before she does, she meets a nurse who is in white, you know, looks like a nurse, is a nurse.
Yeah.
She reaches out to the nurse because she knows she's going to need a lot of help, and she thinks it's wonderful. The nurse then asks permission if she could visit mum when she's at home. Mum says, that would be marvellous. The nurse turns up at the door. She's still dressed in white, not blue as a policeman, and there's drug deals going on inside the house. But the bloke doesn't mind because she says she's just a nurse.
Yes.
And she comes in even to typify it with a pair of bathroom scales. Yes. You see, it's so, scales.
Yes.
And it's so disarming to the family that, and this program works. Yeah,
that was proven a long time ago with the OLS program in America.
That's right, yes.
And that nurses are far more acceptable.
They're not seen as law enforcement.
They're not seen as
the welfare.
That's it. They get caught too because they're also mandated reporters.
Yeah, right.
And it was interesting when I asked Old that he did leave some of the obviously abused children off his study, but that was beside the point.
Right.
But there is no doubt that having supportive, sympathetic, professional help available, which is non-judgmental but available, is an enormous help. And I think it's also, the other important thing is it has to be available for a long time.
That's right. You've got this short dose and then see you later.
One little bit of problems when you've got a new baby. The problems keep changing as the child gets bigger, and your responses have to keep changing.
And your capacity to respond doesn't improve necessarily at all.
And the other thing is, most of what we learn about parenting is a reflection of how we were parented. And so the deficiencies in your own parenting are your bewilderments when you become a parent. And having somebody to reflect on some of this and deal with it. There's no one right answer, and that's fine. But provided the child continues to feel that you're important to them, that you care, that you're there, and that you're both doing a bit of learning along the way.
Well, here's a big question. I've seen a debate unfold about children in clearly abusive situations, but not life-threatening situations, but pretty bad.
Serious,
There is a body of thought which says you take that child, take it out of that situation and put it into a foster home. You're taking the child away from the only constants they know, and despite all abuse, they feel very attached to the mother and the father. You'll do the child more harm. Now, this is a really vexed problem because it's almost condoning allowing that, putting that child in an abusive situation.
It's, to me, the same as treating cancer which is already spread.
Mm-hmm.
If we've got a good health service, we stop the cancer developing.
Yeah.
Or we intervene early when the cancer
Sure.
is treatable. Whatever we do with this child in this situation, there is going to be a disastrous, compromised outcome. Some families still you will manage better by keeping the child in that family, but finding acceptable helps for the child
family,
and the family.
Yeah.
So that the child can feel safer, the child has somewhere to be listened to. And there are many different programs that can do this. Obviously, it's like tertiary cancer. They're more expensive,
Yeah.
they're less successful, but they are possible. You never give up.
Yeah.
But that family should have been picked up way back there.
Yeah.
And some children do need to be removed. This is not
I'm
going
not,
to ever change.
And
No.
I'm not imposing my
and I think
own
most
views.
people,
I think most
people agree that for some children, but we have to make a decision. You can't leave a child in limbo.
Yeah.
It's very interesting. The children I continue to see most are children who've been in long-term foster care. Now, the dilemmas for these children are huge. I think every child has an idealised view of their parents. They know, and I know, their parents are disasters. But I would never, ever say to the child, your parent is a disaster. I'll say things like, have you seen Dad recently? Nah. Is that okay? Yeah. Seen Mum recently? Nah. Is that okay? Yeah. You'll have children say, oh, I guess I'll need to go back when I'm 16 to look after Mum. And even more arresting, thinking of a family with really dangerous, abusive parents, still definitely loving these parents when they're not with them.
Yeah.
And so talking about loving the parents, and they're shrugging their shoulders and saying, but if we lived with them, we'd be dead.
Yeah.
So the child has this enormous grasp of their reality, and I think we often forget this.
Yeah.
And it's not that we can have a conversation as you would with an adult about it, because you have to keep this idealism in the middle.
Yes.
But you're almost saying it's okay to love them and not live with them.
Yeah.
And that's fine.
Yeah.
And so, but I think, again, there has to be the sensitive communication with the child and not imposing our ideals
on them. Yeah.
I mean,
their feelings are completely legitimate. Yeah.
And their feelings are their way of coping with an impossible situation.
Do we still have in this country an attitude that I think we had half a century ago, which is what goes on behind closed doors is none of my business? And that is that people know, they can hear the screaming and the shouting and even the hitting, but just say, I can't get involved. That's within the
Very
parent.
much so. And the thing which probably is not talked about a lot is this is more prevalent in the higher socio-economic groups. In many ways, if you're an acknowledged, pretty borderline family, you're so used to people marching into your lives and turning over stones and saying, what are you up to now and what are you going to do?
Yeah. Whether it's law and order authority, police or
child welfare, nurses, the lot.
Centrelink,
You've got
people.
a barrage of people coming through your lives all the time. If you have status, money, you're used to running your own life, you're used to not having people. I mean, even if abuse was notified, you possibly knock on the front door and say, well, talk to my solicitor.
Yeah.
You're not, and certainly I've seen children from homes like this, and at the initial discussion there's no doubt that this child has been life-threateningly harmed or threatened. By the time you see the family, we're all united, we love each other, and you stay out of our lives.
For the outside world.
At the same time, these families also have more money, that they have options like boarding school and things which can keep children safer. But there is still a huge feeling that your home is your castle and what goes on, and provided you do it quietly.
Yeah,
and if you live in bigger houses with bigger yards, people don't hear it anyway.
The kids are your possession. You can do with them what, like the cat, kick the cat, kick the dog, go and euthanize, don't want to look after the dog anymore.
Get rid of it.
Get to the pound. I'm not saying they do that to kids, but the attitude is they're your possessions.
Yes.
And it's not our business what you do with your possessions.
Very much so, and that is still very much so. As I said, it is probably more associated with more money, more status, more control, when you're used to controlling all aspects of your lives and you expect to control your children too.
Now, I just want to get on before we finish with the end part of NAPCAN, the neglect.
Yeah.
It used to be, the National child abuse, and neglect has been added. And in fact, I set up a group called Parliamentarians Against Child Abuse, and I now know it's changed to child abuse and neglect.
Yeah.
What's the thinking behind that?
Well, I think this is probably my biggest learning in my work. We know that harming a child, it's distressing to watch, it's distressing to think about, and you can understand it can damage or even kill the child. We're far less interested in neglect because it's not so arrestingly obvious. I mean, obviously photographs of desperately physically neglected, filthy, dirty, emaciated children kids, upset us all very much. But the child who is not seen, without any doubt, the most severely developmentally compromised and emotionally compromised children I have seen have been neglected children.
And what does neglect constitute?
And what neglect for these children, more than anything, is not being seen, not being interacted with, not being delighted in, certainly.
So not much sense of self-worth.
No sense of self, let alone worth. Children who would be left in a cot, in a bedroom, with the blinds down during the day. In fact, Professor Bruce Perry, who's one of the pioneers in this field, gave the story of an American couple, very nice middle-class people, had a baby, both wanted to keep working and thought the good solution here, the wife had a young niece, get her to come each day to mind the baby and we'll all be happy. Well, the niece, unbeknownst to them, the niece would arrive, feed, change the baby, put it in the cot, turn off the lights, turn off the music, go off and play with the friends all day.
Right.
Come back home an hour before the parents were due home, lights, music, food, nappy changes, all happening. I think they were probably not the brightest of parents, despite being clever.
Yeah, hadn't spotted
they
that.
didn't, and they began to realise this baby wasn't developing, wasn't smiling, wasn't beginning to crawl and walk. And by the time this was picked up, well at the end of the first year, this child had suffered irretrievable brain damage from an undevelopment of the brain, because our brains develop by the
stimulus,
communication, and it's not only the stimulus. And I think this is where a lot of childcare centres need the additional support and education. Putting a child in a nice, bright environment with mobiles and music and people is not enough.
No.
If the child's lying in the middle of it, it's having somebody playing with them, playing when they change the nappy, singing to them, talking to them, and responding, actually develops the brain. And if you don't get that, the brain doesn't develop. And it's as bad as having an infection or an illness.
Wow.
And many children it's probably the biggest dangers here are developmental delay in the parents, mental health problems, and drug and alcohol. They're probably the three biggest groups. And you've got a child cared for with people with these problems without additional people to provide what they can't provide. These children do appallingly badly. So they're not obvious children. They've given up in despair. They're not used to being responded to. And this goes back to the Bowlby work in hospitals in the 1940s, when children would be put in hospital for a hernia or something, kept in for some weeks, and parents weren't allowed to visit because it made the kids cry. And these children returned home different children and never recovered.
Wow.
Same way with the big nurseries. This interests me now with all the stuff on the new hospitals in single rooms and cross-infection. They had these babies in cots and they weren't looked after, particularly orphanages. Physically well cared for, feeding excellent, no attention. These children did appallingly. Then they found they had this group of children and they had another group of children. They really focused on cross-infection because these children were dying. You can actually die from emotional despair. And,
so sad,
and some of them they really focused on lack of no cross-infection, so the babies were even more isolated with sheets hung between the cots to keep the germs out. These babies died faster. Babies, and the obvious examples are these terrible Romanian orphanages and places like that. they found that the baby on the left-hand side of the door, who tend to be, the nurses would pick up one child to walk around the room. That child did better than the other children because even this minimal
little
contact.
Bit of stimulus.
I spoke to a young psychology student who'd been there and found that the kids coming into the meal would go thump. And even that was a connection and a communication and helped their development. And we really only beginning to realise now the profound effects of lack of communication.
And this is all
we have to. We need it to survive.
Yeah,
and that is a bit of dirt didn't hurt anybody.
Yeah.
And particularly people like child protection workers and police coming in talk at great length about the cat poo on the floor and the rest of it. And I mean, none of this is good.
No.
I'm not condoning it for a minute. But you're going to have all of that and a child who's talked to and loved and played with. And they'll be okay.
Well, indeed, even the cross-infection. I'm not a medical person, but when we were kids, if someone had measles, they brought the kid to the house to give you the measles to get it over and done with. A deliberate cross-infection.
Yeah, that's right.
So if there's one thing that you could change in the world, in this area of child abuse and neglect, what would it be?
I think it has to be a whole community attitude to children. We have to see them as valuable as they are, as well as a valuable potential for the future, and recognise that the better we nurture them now, the better all of our future will be. And I think even if we only take the purely selfish view that these people will be looking after me in my old age, and I'd certainly like to be looked after by an empathic, caring, interactive carer who knows about thinking about feelings and responding to feelings and treating people respectfully. And this is really what I'm wanting with children. We don't want them to get away with blue murder. We want them to be part of the community. Traditional communities had fewer children and more grown-ups per child. We've now got fewer grown-ups and overwhelming masses of children in many situations. And it's helping each child to know that they're special as a person and they have both rights and responsibilities. They have a right to be loved and cared about and respected, but also growing up knowing they're part of a community and they're a contributing part of that community. If we do all that, we don't have to spend so much money on child abuse.
Dr. Sue Packer, it's been a great honour and pleasure to have you on the program.
It's been a great pleasure to talk about my passion.
Thank you for driving that.
Well, I think that Australia may be more divided on climate change in some ways, but it also had a more active politicized debate on climate change than many other countries. And so I think